Somewhere in Japan, in a quiet Shinto shrine far from Tokyo's palaces and press cameras, a woman in white robes performs a ritual that has been passed down for centuries. Few of the tourists who pass through the shrine gates realize that the priestess walking calmly through the sacred grounds was once the only daughter of an emperor. 18 years ago, she was Her Imperial Highness Princess Nori, heir to nothing but tradition, privilege, and a life mapped out for her since birth. Today, she is simply Sayako Kuroda, a private citizen who chose an ordinary man over an extraordinary title. What made her walk away from everything she was born into? And what has her life actually looked like since then? Stick with us, because her story says a lot about what people are willing to give up for love, and what they gain in return. To understand Princess Nori, you first have to understand the family she came from. Japan's imperial line claims to be the oldest continuous monarchy on Earth, with roots stretching back more than 2,000 years and a mythology that ties the emperors to the sun goddess Amaterasu. For most of that history, the throne was treated as something almost divine, untouchable by the ordinary world. That began to change after the Second World War, when Emperor Hirohito publicly renounced any claim to divinity, and the imperial family was reduced, under Japan's new constitution, to a purely symbolic role with no political power. It was Nori's father, Emperor Akihito, who first cracked open the rigid rules surrounding who a royal could marry. As a young crown prince, he fell for a woman named Michiko Shota, whom he met on a tennis court. She wasn't nobility. She came from a wealthy merchant family and had been raised in a Catholic school, which was more than enough to scandalize the traditionalists inside the palace. Opposition reportedly ran deep within his own family, and Michiko was sent abroad for a time in an attempt to end the relationship. It didn't work. In 1959, Akihito married her anyway, making her the first commoner in over 2,000 years of tradition to marry into the direct imperial line. Their marriage produced 3 children: Naruhito, who is now Japan's reigning emperor; Fumihito, who became crown prince; and a daughter born a decade later, who would eventually take this same rebellious streak even further than her parents ever had. That daughter was Sayako, born in April 1969 and given the formal title Princess Nori. She was raised at the Gakushuin institutions in Tokyo, schools originally built to educate the aristocracy, surrounded by tutors, staff, and the quiet expectation that she would eventually marry and step out of public life, as royal daughters in Japan are required to do. Palace life meant servants for everything, chauffeured cars instead of trains or buses, and a childhood almost entirely insulated from the practical rhythms of ordinary Japanese life. Her father reportedly gave her the nickname Miss Don't Mind for how easily she seemed to shrug off life's frustrations, though her mother has also spoken about the sense of confinement Sayako sometimes felt simply from being born into that position. She wasn't idle, though. Sayako studied Japanese language and literature at Gakushuin University, graduating in 1992, the same year her father formally ascended the throne following Hirohito's death. That year she also joined the Yamashina Institute for Ornithology as a part-time research associate, focusing much of her academic work on kingfishers around the imperial palace grounds. It made her the first princess in Japan's modern history to draw an actual paycheck. Alongside the bird research, she carried out the ceremonial duties expected of an adult royal, representing the imperial family on trips to more than a dozen countries, and quietly supporting her parents, and by extension her sister-in-law, Crown Princess Masako, who was under enormous public pressure at the time. Watching her parents' marriage up close, a relationship that had survived open hostility from the palace establishment, appears to have shaped how Sayako thought about her own future. She has said in past interviews that she decided early on that she would only marry for love, whenever that happened, tradition or no tradition, that whenever arrived through an unlikely reunion. Yashiki Kuroda had actually known Sayako since childhood. The two had attended the same Gakushuin schools as classmates of her brother Fumihito, and Kuroda had visited the family's estate over the years as a family friend. He worked as an urban planner, first for Toyota and later switching to the Tokyo metropolitan government, reportedly because he preferred to stay near his mother in Tokyo rather than take a job that might require relocating. There was nothing especially glamorous about his background. His family wasn't wealthy nobility. His father had been an ordinary company employee. He was, by most accounts, simply a hardworking, low-key civil servant who happened to be tall, serious-looking, and easy to talk to. The two reconnected properly in 2003 at a gathering hosted by Fumihito, and from there, what had been a distant childhood acquaintance slowly turned into something else. Because Sayako's public movements were so restricted, much of the early relationship reportedly played out through visits, phone calls, and letters rather than typical dates, with her brother's residence sometimes serving as a discreet meeting point. By December 2004, the engagement was official, and Japan's broadcasters carried the announcement live. At the press conference, Sayako made a point of asking the media to go easy on Kuroda, aware of how intense the scrutiny was about to become for a man who had never asked for public attention. She admitted to reporters that she'd always known marriage would mean leaving the imperial family behind, and that while the uncertainty of it made her anxious, none of it came as a surprise. Kuroda, for his part, described the moment he proposed to her over tea at her brother's home in fairly plain, understated terms, which, in hindsight, fit the tone of their entire relationship. Under Japan's imperial household law, any female member of the royal family who marries a commoner must give up her title, her royal status, and her place in the imperial household entirely. There was no ambiguity about what marrying Kuroda would cost her. She would become, legally and socially, an ordinary citizen. Reportedly, nobody within the family seriously opposed the match, but the terms of the law itself were non-negotiable. Sayako accepted them without much resistance. By her own account, she had never felt entirely at home behind the palace's gilded walls anyway. They married on November 15, 2005, in a modest ceremony at Tokyo's Imperial Hotel rather than inside the palace itself. Sayako broke with royal wedding tradition by wearing a simple white silk gown instead of the elaborate 12-layered ceremonial kimono typically worn by imperial brides. Only around 30 guests attended the ceremony itself, with roughly 120 at the reception, including then Tokyo Governor Shintaro Ishihara. It was, by imperial standards, an almost quiet affair, yet crowds still lined the streets between the palace and the hotel, hoping to catch a glimpse of the bride who was about to disappear from royal life entirely. She became, at 36, only the sixth woman born into the post-war imperial family to marry outside it, and the first in more than 2 decades to do so. The government gave her a one-time payment, reportedly worth over $1 million, to help ease the transition, a kind of severance package for a life she was permanently leaving. She had to learn how to drive. She had to learn how to shop for groceries and pay with a bank card, tasks that had simply never been part of her world before. She resigned from her ornithology position and, for the first time in her life, started doing her own housework, cooking, cleaning, the whole unfamiliar rhythm of a home without staff. It wasn't effortless. Friends and family have suggested she leaned on lessons from her own mother during that adjustment, including one particular story Empress Michiko used to tell her as a child about a snail who complains about the weight of its shell, until it notices every other snail is carrying one too. Fast forward to the present, and Sayako Kuroda's life looks nothing like a fairy tale ending, but it also doesn't look like exile. She and Yashiki still appear occasionally at major imperial events. They were present, for instance, when her brother Naruhito was formally enthroned as emperor in 2019. She remains close with her nieces and nephews. When her niece Princess Aiko celebrated her coming-of-age ceremony in 2021, Sayako lent her the same tiara she herself had worn for her own coming-of-age back in 1989, since a new one wasn't commissioned during the pandemic. But the biggest turn in her post-royal life came through religion, not politics. In 2012, she was appointed a high priestess at the Ise Grand Shrine, Japan's most sacred Shinto site, dedicated to Amaterasu, the sun goddess the imperial line claims descent from. She trained there under her aunt, Atsuko Ikeda, who had also lost her royal title decades earlier after marrying a commoner. When her aunt retired in 2017, Sayako was elevated to supreme priestess, a position she still holds today. It's a role that keeps her spending weeks at a time away from Tokyo, living near the shrine and performing rites that connect her, in a strange and fitting way, back to the imperial mythology she left behind on paper, but never entirely escaped in practice. Meanwhile, her husband's career has moved along steadily inside city government, eventually earning a promotion into a more senior planning role. The two never had children, and reports suggest they finished paying off their home mortgage after roughly 15 years together. About as unremarkable and middle-class a milestone as it gets for a woman who was once heir to nothing less than a divine bloodline. Now in her 50s, Sayako Kuroda has spent nearly 2 decades as a private citizen, and by most accounts, she seems at peace with the trade she made. She gave up palaces, servants, chauffeurs, and a title stretching back millennia, in exchange for a modest home, a long marriage to an unremarkable but devoted man, and a religious role that lets her serve quietly rather than perform publicly. It's easy to romanticize a story like this. Princess gives up the crown for love, but her real life afterward wasn't glamorous. It was groceries, mortgage payments, and learning to drive a car in her 30s. Maybe that's exactly the point. She didn't trade royalty for a fantasy. She traded it for something ordinary, and ordinary, it turns out, was what she wanted all along. So here's the real question worth sitting with. If you were in her position, born into every luxury imaginable, but none of the freedom that comes with an ordinary life, would you have made the same choice? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed learning about Princess Nori's story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.